And now from the Bedroomer Studios, a special presentation for Grandma Dier. Tales of the Captain Duke, the Stowaway Debutante.
Chapter 6, in which our hero regrets his egregious assumptions. He woke feeling like the greatest fool alive. The Captain Duke groaned as he rolled out of bed to retrieve the tincture of willow bark from the cabinet. He sat, blinking, at his desk as he waited for it to take effect. He expected his crew to bear their responsibilities, and so would he, headache or no. He was in a foul mood, and the lingering effects of last night's festivities were only partly to blame. He was certain that he had ruined the evening. An apology was definitely in order. He had lashed out at Clara with his accusations when there was little, if any, merit to them. He wished he could take back his words. She had an inconvenient effect on him. It wasn't entirely unwelcome, but he couldn't afford to let his interests complicate their professional relationship. He tried to convince himself that she was just another pilot, but he was all too aware that the facts were otherwise. He pushed the mystery to the back of his mind. Even if Clara was out for her own tale of the Captain Duke, the reality of the difference in their stations could not be denied for long. He wondered if his own mythology was coming now to haunt him. A knock on the door preceded the entrance of Trick, bearing a much-welcome plate of breakfast and strong coffee to wash it down. The captain waved him over, and started on the meal as Trick gave his report. "The crew are feeling the effects, sir, but most are bearing it happily. It was good to give them reason to celebrate." "Good to see it wasn't wasted on all," he grumbled, as he drank deeply. "Wasted? Not at all. Everyone had a pleasant time," Trick responded cheerfully. Too cheerfully. "And what is the reason for your good mood?" the captain asked. "What is the reason behind your unpleasant one? It's none of your business. It is if you think I'm about to let you spoil all of your good favor with the crew by storming around with a cloud over your head. Out with it." The captain glared, but he could not deny Trick's counsel. "It's the girl." "Clara?" "Yes, what other girl? Of course I mean Clara." His voice caught on her name as he scowled at his meal. "She is quite an exceptional young lady," said Trick. "I can see why she might have an effect on you, but I cannot fathom why it would be a poor one." "I might have been rude last night," said the captain. Trick looked at him with shock, and spoke in a rare fit of anger. "Captain, I have never known you to make inappropriate advances, and you better not have started now. Clara is a proper young lady, and you will make any reparations necessary to keep her on this ship if she so chooses." "Calm yourself, Trick. I did no such thing." "Well then, what happened?" "I might have inferred that she could be a spy." "Inferred?" "Accused, more like." Trick sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Ah, Captain, what am I to do with you?" He chose not to answer, taking a large bite of breakfast instead. "Well, what are you planning to do about it?" The captain swallowed and took a dainty sip of the coffee. "I plan to run my ship as I always do." "And Clara?" "Is a pilot, an employee. I see no reason to press the matter further." Trick sighed and paced the room. The captain ignored him, studiously examining the cooling food as he ate. Trick gave another loud sigh and walked to the door. The captain shoveled another bite into his mouth. "Fine," said Trick. "Be stubborn. But she's a special one. You know it. I know it. She's got some touch of destiny about her. You can't ignore it forever." With that, he exited the cabin in a huff. The captain sat back and pushed the plate away. He was no longer hungry. Instead, he stared out the porthole and thought over his options. It was dangerous to get close to the girl, but that did not prevent him from wanting to help her on her journey. The ship was big enough to avoid her. He could pass on requests through Trick and Nessa easily enough. Besides, after a few days of work on the ship, she might decide to leave after all. A pilot's life was nothing like the grand tales told in parlor rooms. He figured she might make it through a single raid before quitting. Yes, that was it. One taste of their real work and Clara would be off at the nearest port. No good could come of closer association, and a debutante was not cut out for the pilot's life. He washed himself and finished dressing. By the time he was ready to join his crew, the Captain Duke had convinced himself that she would likely be ready to leave that very day. Instead, he was greeted by shouts and hollers from the men and women gathered on the deck, all staring upwards. Craning his neck to see what they were looking at, he saw Clara high above, balanced on the glider deck. She was strapped alongside little Cat, who appeared to be giving her some final instructions. Mouse was above them, monitoring the wind speed. A signal from him was all they needed to make the leap, plunging down along with his heart. He took a few panicked steps forward before catching his composure, and waited, breathless, as they curved out over the water and did a few laps around the ship. His stomach rolled into knots, and he found he was glad he hadn't finished his breakfast after all. Still, as they soared by, his anxiety was overcome by the glider's obvious joy. They were harnessed together, moving in tandem as they maneuvered the wings, legs stretched out and hooked into the leather loops that controlled the tail wing. It was an older model that they used for training, more cumbersome, but sturdy. The lighter models, used by his pilots, required one's absolute concentration and complete control. The captain watched as they circled. The delighted shouts of the two young women could be heard even over the loud encouragement from the crew. Finally, they turned in to land on the deck, releasing their legs and banking the wings to slow their descent. They found their feet with ease, unstrapping themselves and collapsing the wings of the glider before clasping each other in a great hug, Clara practically picking Cat up off the deck. Grinning ear to ear, they turned to give deep curtsies to the cheering pilots. Nessa walked over to stand by the captain, calling out, "Oh, you're looking a little pale there, Captain. How did you like our morning lessons?" "I had not realized it would be so soon," he said. "Oh, she insisted, and Cat was all for it. She seems to have woken none the worse for the festivities last night. They came this morning as soon as we were over the water. This is their 4th run so far. Mouse claims she's a natural, but they want her to have more tandem practice before they'll let her take one on her own. They've taken over her training, I see." Nessa laughed. "Can you blame them? They're eager to have such a willing student, and she's been very respectful of their teachings, even despite their ages. She treats them like the experts they are." A small smile crossed his lips before he caught it. "Very well, as long as it doesn't interfere with their work, or the work of the crew. Yes, sir, Captain, I'll get them back on task. And Nessa, we'll need to meet about the plans for the next raid. Have you had news from Robbie?" "He's safely at the Haven. His transmission came this morning. He made contact with a few sources that might have interesting leads for us." "Excellent. We'll have an officers' meeting before dinner." Nessa gave him a salute before leaving to assign the crew their duties for the day. He saw Clara standing with Cat and Mouse, still glowing from the flight, but listening with rapt attention as the young boy gave her instructions for her next attempt, gesturing wildly with his arms to mimic their flight. She nodded in understanding and shook their hands, saying something that made the two young pilots glow with happiness. They ran off after Nessa pointed them to their tasks. He saw Clara smile after them. Then her eyes turned and caught his gaze. He tried to give her a curt, friendly nod, but she held his gaze until Nessa caught her attention again. She followed Nessa to the ropes without a second glance backwards. The captain sighed. This was going to be more difficult than he thought. He wanted her to succeed. He wanted her to stay. He wanted to teach her everything about his ship and watch as her face lit with that glow that came with mastering each new task. He banished the thought before it could form completely, and went about his day. A captain could be very busy if he chose to be, and he had decided that the best course of action was to throw himself into his work. The next week proceeded without incident. When Clara was working on deck, he busied himself in his office. When she was assisting Trick with the bookkeeping, he found himself navigating or overseeing the work of the crew. When she had her gliding lessons high above the decks, only then did he find reason to be somewhere where he could watch her fly. He noticed that Clara's hands were raw from the ropes one night, at the evening meal, and discreetly had Nessa place some extra lanolin oil in the woman's cabin. He noticed that she struggled to reach some of the higher shelves, and had the ledgers moved down. When they ran into each other at supper, the two exchanged nothing more than a comment on the fine weather before he hurried off with some excuse. The time was approaching for their next raid, and he was determined to keep her safely out of the way with Cat and Mouse. The two children complained every time, but had accepted his verdict that they were not allowed on active raids until they were 16 and could best Nessa in a duel. He watched the clouds pass by the porthole in his office. He heard Trick enter behind him, shutting the door quietly. "Do you have the plans ready? Nessa will be joining us shortly," the captain called out without turning. Silence greeted him. "Do you have them, or no—" he cut off as he turned to discover Clara standing in his quarters. I'm sorry to bother you, she said. Trick asked me to work on the ledgers. Oh, of course. He stood straight and inwardly swore at himself when he saw her eyes narrow. I can work on them another time if my presence disturbs you, she said, with a dangerous lilt to her voice. The captain saw the challenge too late and knew he was trapped. Not at all. Please, make yourself comfortable. Clara walked by him with her chin in the air to pull one of the large, leather-bound registers from the middle shelves. She sat at the desk in the corner and opened it to the page she had worked on last. Her neat handwriting was a great improvement over his first mate's crooked calligraphy. She had learned a better form of double-entry accountancy, and Trick had entrusted her with the task of transferring the inventory numbers. He went to busy himself with the maps and reading the latest missive from Robbie. I noticed you moved the books around. Thank you, she said. He tried to think of a suitable reply, but a heavy silence dragged on until she interrupted his attempt. Nothing? Very well, then. I beg your pardon? He asked, with as much detachment as he could muster. He chanced a glance in her direction and found her half-turned in her chair, glaring at him. He felt his chest constrict. Gods, but she was a sight. Green eyes flashing, dark hair escaping its plait as always. Long legs clad in breeches and tall boots. The long coat she usually wore had been abandoned in the summer heat. She was absolutely captivating. You have hardly spoken to me this week, she said. I have been occupied. A captain has many duties, he replied. She flushed at that. He was sorry for his sternness immediately after speaking. Forgive me. I was only wondering if you regret your decision, she said. Regret? Which decision, exactly? He asked. To allow me on your ship. My pilot's commission. You are friendly to all, and yet you make a point of ignoring me. I have done no such thing. You have so. Have I been impolite? Not at all. Your politeness is astounding. Then what is your concern? It's you... I want to know why. Why? I am your captain. I do not have time to attend to every individual on my ship, he said carefully. He deliberately relaxed his posture, stretching his legs under the table as he turned back to his maps. And yet the ledgers appear to be rearranged, she said. I meant to organize them long ago. So it was not because they were out of reach for your new bookkeeper, she asked. It made more sense to place them on a lower shelf. And the lanolin oil? They glared at each other from their seats across the room. Why couldn't she let things be? Why must they discuss this all now, when he was so unsettled by her proximity? He was not a young lad any more, and was no longer used to feeling quite so shaken around a woman. What of it? He asked. She gave him a look so thorough he was certain she was examining his very soul. Pardon my attempt at gratitude for a kind gesture. I will work on the accounts at a more convenient time. Clara shut the book and rose to leave, her chair scraping against the floorboards. She walked across the cabin, her stride losing more of the debutante each day as her comfort grew with the sway of the airship. He stood and cut her off before she reached the door. Wait. He put a hand on her arm to stop her. He was at a loss of what to say, but he knew he'd never hear the end of it if Trick or Nessa saw that he had angered her. They were standing too close. She glanced at his hand quickly, then up to meet his eyes. Please forgive me, he said. The request hung in the air as the moment lingered. Then the door opened, and Nessa walked in. I see you two are getting along better, she smirked, leaning against the door jamb. The blood warmed Clara's cheeks, and the captain swore under his breath as he quickly released her. He turned back to the table with the maps. We'll hold the officers' meeting now. Clara, you may do the books later, he said, trying to sound authoritative. He was actually glad of the interruption, despite being caught mid-apology. He needed more time to think. Right now, however, he only wanted to throw himself into planning this raid. A perfectly excusable distraction. The problem of Clara could wait. Trick stepped in as Clara walked out. The captain saw him glance towards the desk in the corner, then raise an eyebrow at Nessa, who gave a tiny shake of her head and a look that said it might be best to raise the issue another time. The captain decided not to comment on their conspiracy, yet. There were more important things to take care of first. Well, what's the latest news? Trick settled into his seat. The latest from Robbie says that there's not many who will cross our paths until next month, but there's one bringing grains to London in 5 days' time, and we can cross its path on the way to the haven. The winds are favoring us. It's reported to be quite the haul, but we don't have as much information on the cargo as I'd like. Good. We'll take this opportunity. Robbie's contact didn't express any concerns? None. But I would rather learn more before we intercept the goods. We could wait until next month, when Robbie and the rest of the crew are back. Nessa? Well, we have enough pilots to pull it off if we're careful. I don't want us taking unnecessary risks without a full crew, but the merchants up north will need the goods sooner rather than later. Then, we'll just have to be clever about it, said the captain. If you're certain, then I'll agree with the two of you, Trix sighed. We'll do this raid, then head north for a delivery run, and pick up Robbie on the way. Good, said the captain. Now let's be clever. The three spoke long into the dinner hour, eating from plates brought down from the mess hall by Mouse. By the evening hour the plan was in place. They set course for the interception point and began preparations.